Well, Tubular Bells 1 was made in 1973 and with the technology of the time. And although it was pretty good for the time it was made, it always annoyed me that it was made in such a rush. And there were a lot of technical imperfections in it because I was so rushed. I didn't have time to tune the guitar for a start. That's why the thing is out of tune. And although it works very well. To my ears it sounds out of tune and out of time and sloppy. I'm touring with a songwriter called Kevin Ayres, and we were quite often on the same bill with Free. And I just used to love Kossoff's guitar playing, the way he would, you know, everything the guitar played, it's like he was mouthing it with his mouth, you know, and I just loved that. He made it really speak. That's what gave me the idea that I didn't need to have vocals on my music. The first time I went in a recording studio, I sort of looked into the possibilities of it. And then what happened, I used to turn up early for sessions when I was working with Kevin Ayres, and it was in Abbey Road number 2, which is where a lot of the Beatles' work was done. And in that studio there was a whole load of instruments just lying around, and I'd get there early and just play around with all these wonderful things like, you know, timpani and harpsichords and mellotrons, and I'd just be like an Aladdin's cave in there, and I loved it so much. And then the time came for the session to start, and Kevin hadn't turned up, and the rest of the band hadn't turned up. So I just sat around for about half an hour thinking, what should I do? And then I said to the engineer, well, if they're not going to turn up, maybe I could do everything on my own, just something to do. And he said, all right then. So I went downstairs and I played a couple of bits of percussion, and then said, can I put a bass now on? And he said, yeah. And so I played a bit of bass. He said, can I put some guitars on now? And I said, yeah. And I played a guitar. And you know, after about 2.5 hours, I'd made this whole thing all on my own. And then the band turned up with all hungover and looking like that. And said, did you do that? I said, yep. So I discovered that it was possible. And I'd also heard that Paul McCartney had been in the next studio and he was playing everything himself. And I enjoyed it so much, just hearing the last thing I did in a pair of headphones and putting on a new thing and gradually building it up. I was 19 and I was finding the world very confusing, and while I was making Tubular Bells, I found people to be very cynical and dubious and like that. Then suddenly they were the total opposite, and I couldn't understand why they'd changed and I hadn't, you know. So then I sort of, well, everything's gone really strange. Suddenly everybody wants to know me now, and whereas they didn't like 3 months before. And I felt very much under some kind of spotlight. I wanted to get away from it all, because I felt that, you know, there was a lot of attention on me because it was very, very successful, and people wanted to talk to me, wanted to interview me. There was pressure on me to go and do concerts everywhere. I did one concert, and for me that was so terrifying and unsatisfactory musically that I didn't want to do any more. And I annoyed a lot of people by not wanting to speak to them and not wanting to go out and promote Tubular Bells' success. But, you know, as it turned out, it did great anyway. It probably didn't do my public relations with the media and you know, promoters, record company. It probably didn't do that any good, because they thought of me as, you know, I wouldn't play ball, and I just wanted to go off and lived in this very remote place in the middle of the Welsh hills, Welsh mountains, and got on with writing the next piece of music and basically trying to survive each day being so disturbed and unhappy. So that's how I cope with it. I did work on one film called The Killing Fields. Many people think that The Exorcist was something that I worked on, but I didn't. They just took pieces of Tubular Bells, so I never even met a single actor or director. But with The Killing Fields, thing I enjoyed most about that was working with people who are very talented in a different world, because musicians tend to stick with musicians, and I got to know people who are very talented in a totally different area of creativity. The trouble with collaborations is I've got my own way of doing things and my own way of seeing music that it doesn't mix very well with other people. I mean, I have to either totally take over a project or step back from it so much that I'm sort of kind of unrecognizable in it. I think in a normal artist-producer collaboration, I can handle that, but as with another artist, that's a little bit difficult. Well, certainly with instrumental music, but there have been a couple of times when I've collaborated with people on songs. That worked out quite well. I'm really focused on it, and I don't like somebody coming in and saying, well, you know, why not do this instead? I'm going, no, this is it, you know. That applies to instrumental music, but maybe with songs, you know, I could work with a lyricist, for example, because that doesn't interfere with my way of making music. It's just adding something on top. It was quite interesting, actually, revisiting the past. I wanted to conjure up as many atmospheres that existed in 1973, reconjure them up. I even painted my studio the same as the old manor house was, and I worked with a couple of the same people. I found out where some of the people who used to work there lived and went to meet them, and I approached it in a very methodical way, in that I broke down Tubular Bells you know, diagrammatically into all its component parts, and sort of looked at different elements that were important in it, like, for example, elements of chaos. There were certain bits where the whole thing just went chaotic, you know, so I wanted to have those type of chaotic elements in Tubular Bells too. And but basically it all boiled down to if the thing didn't sound right and feel right, it wasn't right, you know. There were certain link sections which didn't really matter, but the whole thing as a complete entity had to be satisfying if you were to listen from beginning to end. And that took a lot of juggling, because it had sort of, you know, many hundreds of component parts, tiny little overdubs and all sorts of little things. I suppose the biggest difference was having a producer like Trevor Horn working on Tubular Bells too, because he was like a bit like a judge in a courtroom, you know. I'd sort of come up. My problem is I have too many ideas. I came up with 20 ideas. Hey, what do you think of this one? And he'd go, you know, and he'd sort of pick which ones he liked, and that gave me some kind of filter. Otherwise, you know, I used to do what he would describe as machine gunning the tape with overdubs. You know, I just go in there, and in the space of 3 hours I've done 40 overdubs all over it, and I try on all different combinations of things and to see what worked and what didn't work. And I always felt I had to compromise when I was playing live versions of my music, because that was the days before sampling, and sampling means that you can take an exact sound from your album, actually from the master of your album. Like a percussion player can play it on electronic pads. And also I never had the courage to actually treat it as a classical concert before, and that was the secret of Edinburgh. I mean, it was a fantastic evening, you know. We were all very nervous because we weren't sure how Tubular Bells 2 was going to be received, but it went down stunningly well, you know, and turned me back on to live concerts again. So with Edinburgh it was rigid, although that might sound a little bit unadventurous. It's so unusual for that to happen, but the end result was we got something which was a very... I'm still learning as far as production and making music is concerned. In fact, I feel that I'm just beginning, really. I feel that all the albums I've made and all the music I've made hasn't really taught me anything. It's taught me a lot of things to avoid. Like, if it's taught me one thing, it's that somebody playing a real instrument with 100% love and affection and concentration for what they're doing is worth, you know, everything. I just want to refine what I know and get the best results I can possibly get with my future music. As I said before, I feel I'm only starting and the more I learn, the less I realise I know. And I don't know how it's going to end up. But there's one thing that nobody will ever be able to take away from me.